All right, let's get started then. Welcome to the Interrogation Workshop put on by the New Mexico Forensics Club. My name is Jason Gates. We are a homeschool speech and debate club. I guess technically, when we were first formed 4 years ago, the intent was to be a speech and debate club that was open to anyone, regardless of educational setting or faith background or anything like that. But in practice, the only people who decide to show up are Christian homeschoolers. So that's kind of really the focus now. Hey guys, come on in. Come grab a seat. We're just getting started here. So a bit more about the club. We meet at least this semester every other Friday. We kind of bounce back and forth between locations depending on who's involved any given semester. But we meet for 2 hours, and the sort of things we do is we have some sort of instructional content, like teaching you the art of effective questioning. We have some amount of time that's spent on worldview analysis and apologetics. There's some amount of time that's spent actually preparing speeches or presentations of some form or another, writing those, working on delivery, memorization, all that jazz. We'll have an end of semester showcase in April. And then the other stuff that we spend some of our time on when we get together is either extemporaneous speaking, where you draw a topic out of a hat and then you have like 2 minutes to prepare a 5-minute speech on it, or what we're going to do later today, which is extemporaneous debate, which is I draw a debate topic out of a hat and then you guys get to go at it. So that's what our regular club meetings look like. We also try to do workshops like this one, usually about once a quarter. And the motivation there was I wanted an opportunity, because not everyone can fit our club into their schedule, but I wanted some sort of opportunity to reach out to parents in the homeschool community so I can teach you guys the same sort of skill building activities we do in our club so that you take those back to your own homeschools and figure out how to work it into your family rhythm. And I guess the goal in all of this is making sure your kiddos are trained up and ready to really go head to head with the world before you launch them out there. So that's the club in a nutshell. That's kind of what we're doing today. To give you an idea of past workshops we've done one on worldview analysis, where you take various things from current events and figure out how to analyze it from a worldview perspective. We've done one on apologetics. How do you incorporate apologetics training into just kind of regular family activities so it's not something for super Christians, it's just what we do as a family. Let's see, we did one on biblical hermeneutics, and I'm probably forgetting some others, but that's the sort of thing that we're doing. So let's see, let's actually go ahead and dive into what we're talking about today, the interrogation workshop. So I called this module when I taught it the art of effective questioning. And I guess the first question I want to deal with before we really dive in is why does this matter? Why does it matter for you guys to learn how to ask questions well? Feel free to throw out answers. Because Mr. Gates said it was important. No, well, clearly, but yeah, what other reasons? Why does it matter? Why do you need to know how to ask questions well? Clarification. Ooh, that's a big one. Yeah, you need clarification. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Gain new perspectives.
Gain new perspectives? That's a great idea. Yeah, really easy for people to just think one way and not think outside that box, not ever consider anything else. It's a great answer. Any other thoughts? Okay, yeah, engage the other person and kind of draw stuff out of them rather than, hitting them with arguments and just expecting them to hit back. Okay, yeah, all great ideas. The one I'm really going to highlight here is we want, let me put it like this, we want productive conversation. Okay? I think all the things we just said are kind of subsumed in that one kind of statement. We want to make sure if things aren't clear, we're not having a productive conversation. If we're not actually engaging the other person, we're not having a productive conversation. So why do questions matter? Because I want you guys to actually have a meeting of the minds with the other person. So that's not to say that you're going to wind up agreeing with each other at the end of it, but you really need to get to the point where you fully understood each other. And if you do disagree, you can clearly say, okay, this is where we disagree and this is why. Okay, that's what I mean by meeting of the minds. You really understand each other. You've really worked things out. Okay, so that's the why. The next question we want to look at is where do you wind up using questions? if I'm going to teach you a bunch of skills of how to use effective questions, where is that going to matter to you in life? What do you think?
So we can get the answer we're after, or get the best answer out of a person without them beating around the bush, per se.
Okay, so you're trying to get the best answer out of somebody, but what kind of context are you talking about? Just like personal conversation?
Well, it depends. Personal conversation, just so it's more clear. It really depends.
Okay, yeah, so personal conversation, that's one context where this is going to be important. Can you think of other contexts where like your ability to ask really good questions is really important?
In a situation, that's how you get to know the world around you, the person you're speaking with. Any concept, you're going to use a question every single time, otherwise you're not going to get the answer or response you're looking for.
Okay, so anywhere where you're needing more information to really get clarity on what the heck is going on. Okay, that sounds reasonable. Do any of you guys by chance participate in academic debate? No? Does anyone want to be a lawyer when they grow up? Come on, nobody?
Actually, almost do.
I want to argue for a living? Come on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and throw this one up here. Another standard context of where this stuff really matters is in the context of academic debate. So the way those will work, and the way, we'll do the little exercise at the end of the session today, is you'll hear, a speech on one side, the affirmative speech, here's my constructive, here's my arguments, and then you'll have a period of cross-examination where the other side has to ask questions to clarify what on earth did he just say, before then the negative gets up and gives a negative constructive, and then you go back and forth. Between those rounds, you have these periods of cross-examination so you can try to clarify what everyone's saying so you don't wind up arguing past each other. And then there's a third context where being able to ask questions really helps a lot. Not in talking with people directly, not in arguing with people. Can you think of a third context where it might matter? Yeah, go for it.
In thought, even?
Say it again.
Maybe in thought?
In thought? What do you mean? Just thinking by yourself?
Maybe
Asking questions of yourself?
I guess post-debate or something, just kind of questioning, like clarifying to yourself this is right or wrong, why you ought to think so.
Maybe kind of, sort of. I'll have to think about that one more.
Any more practical things like when you're in the doctor's office or the workplace. And you
That's
know
true.
What you need to do. I don't know if those are the kinds of answers you're wanting. But
No, that's fine. Those are great ideas. I would go ahead and loop them into conversation. That's just when you're speaking to folks, but that's totally fine. The other one I'm thinking of is when you're either writing or speaking, okay? So if I'm writing an essay or something, or I'm writing an article that I'm going to submit for publication or whatever, or if I'm, writing a sermon or something like whatever you happen to be writing, and then especially, actually not especially, but in some cases, you're going to take whatever you've written and you're going to turn that into some sort of public oration of some sort. Right now, I'm just kind of speaking extemporaneously to you guys, but it may be the sort of thing where you actually write it out, and then this is something I memorize, I present. So I'll write it like this. In writing or/speaking. And the reason that matters, it kind of goes back to what you thought about, just thinking in your own head. What you want to be able to do is, in those situations, you're not engaged in a back and forth dialogue with someone because it's just you. Like, you're the one doing all the presenting, there's no feedback whatsoever. But what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to anticipate what your audience is going to think, anticipate what questions are going to pop up in their head, and then answer the questions before they get a chance to ask them. Does that kind of make sense? Because it can kind of go two ways. If you don't do that, you wind up just giving your presentation and you don't bother addressing any of your audience's questions. They're sitting there thinking, man, there's a lot of things this guy hasn't considered. He probably really doesn't know what he's talking about. But if you wind up anticipating their questions ahead of time and then answering them as they come up in whatever you're writing or speaking, your audience winds up going, holy cow, I was just about to ask that question. And that was a really great answer. And you seem like magical to them, which increases your persuasiveness. So anyhow, three contexts where this is really important: conversation, debate, and any kind of writing or public speaking. Next question, who? Who are questions for? This may sound like a trick question. Just throw out an answer. It's okay. Anyone? Okay, well that's too easy of an answer. More specific, who are questions for? Say you're in an argument, okay? You're arguing with a sibling, you're going back and forth at it. Red chili, green chili, arr! You know, there's your argument. You're asking your opponent questions, that's one, okay? One person that you can direct the questions to, it's the person that you're arguing with. Who's another audience for your questions? Same scenario, still back and forth arguing one person against another. If you use questions, is there a secondary person that you may intend them for? Yeah.
Just like do you have like an opponent, but you also have like a learning audience, kind of like a
Yeah.
question audience? I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, learning audience, questioning audience, yeah, whoever else is in earshot, basically, okay? Because generally arguments kind of go one of two ways. Either you're able to convince your opponent that you're right, yay, I won, happily ever after, or you're not able to convince your opponent that you're right, they wind up digging in their heels, they're not going to move, but you still want everyone within earshot to realize that, wait a second, no, that my opponent is wrong about this, okay? Red versus green, chili, that's whoop-de-doo, okay? We'll get Christmas when we stop at the store on the way out of here. But anything more substantial than that, and you really want to be able to hit home to anyone within earshot that, no, my opponent has serious errors in their way of thinking, and I don't want the audience to walk away without realizing them. So, who are questions for? Either your, opponent and your audience. All right, last question. How do you use questions? Okay, what purposes? Go ahead and write it as how there. What purposes are questions good for? Yeah?
Persuade.
To persuade? Okay. Yes, that'll fit into one of the things I'm thinking, so I'll jot it down in a moment here. To persuade. What would you use a question for? Yeah?
Just to provoke thought in another person.
Provoke thought. Okay, I'm gonna jot these down over here on the side. Persuade, provoke thought. Whatever. Provoke. Wow, that really didn't erase well. Okay, what other thoughts? We had it earlier over here, right? Clarification, right? Okay. Let's see, I'm gonna, actually more general category. Let's say it like this. I need to gather information. Okay? So that's one primary purpose for which questions can be used. I don't have all the information I need to make a decision. I need more information. I'm going to use questions to get at that information. Okay? Another primary purpose for which we'll use questions is, I think you might have said it earlier, Logan, to make a point. Okay? Persuading people, provoking people to thought, that kind of fits in there, making a point. I'm going to use a question to not state my point directly, but instead I'm going to kind of lead them to the point with a question instead. And then third primary purpose for using questions, I don't know if you guys will get this one, so I'm just going to tell you. Anytime I need to redirect a conversation, okay, you can kind of get the feeling that a conversation's taken a turn for the worse, it's heading in a bad direction. I want to either redirect it back to a healthy place, or I just want to end the conversation, because clearly it's not going to get any better. Okay, and we can use questions to do that. So these are the primary areas where we're going to be talking through how you wind up using questions to achieve what you're trying to get at. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Let's talk about the first one, gathering information. Okay, the term that was used earlier was clarification, right? So there are a couple different things that you want to clarify. And actually, where did my eraser go? I'm going to number these instead. Okay, so the first thing I want you to clarify with questions is any kind of terminology that your opponent is using. Okay? So it's really common in arguments for people to be using the same vocabulary but different dictionaries. It's the sort of thing, we're using the same words, but we mean different things by those words, so we're not actually having a meeting of the minds. Instead, we're just talking past each other. We're confusing ourselves, we're confusing the audience. It's totally an unproductive conversation. So what do we need to do? We need to clarify terms, okay? And the question I'm going to teach you for that is, what do you mean by that? Okay, have you guys used this question a lot before, by chance? What do you mean by that? This is fun, because anytime I teach it to kids, for the rest of the lesson, anytime I ask a question, their response is, what do you mean by that? And it's really annoying, but I'm glad that they're learning. Okay, so the thing is, we need to understand the words, the phrases that the other person is using in order to make sure that we're understanding the points they're trying to make. Okay, if there's anything you don't understand, the first thing I want you to pop into your head is, what do you mean by that? But don't be a broken record. If this is the way you phrase it every time, and you use a little annoying voice, like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? It gets really annoying really fast, so change it up a bit. Like, can you explain that phrase to me? Can you give me a little more detail? One of the ways I kind of use this with my wife frequently, because, you know, perfect partners, but that doesn't mean we communicate perfectly all the time, is I'll say, hang on, say the same thing, but use completely different words. And then she goes through the exercise of figuring out what other words of the English language can I use to help my husband understand what I'm saying. So different ways to change it up, but the question is, what do you mean by that? I want you to clarify the terminology that's being used in the conversation. Okay, once you're clear on the terminology, you can move on to the next bit, which is clarifying analysis. Okay, so at this point, I understand the words that you're using. I even understand how you intend me to understand them, but that doesn't mean I understand your point, okay? Like, I can see what you're saying, but I don't see how you got there. So kind of walk me through that. So the question to go with that one is, why do you think that? Goodness, sorry, my handwriting is awful today. Why do you think that? Walk me through your process. Like, I'm here, I'm trying to understand you, I'm really interested in kind of pursuing this topic with you, figuring out what truth is, but I don't get it, so please help me with that. How did you come to that conclusion? If you've got a lot of time to dig into it, you can ask things like, well, did you ever think something differently in the past? Okay, if so, what changed your mind? Like, walk me through that process. I want to understand what you understand the way you understand it. A lot of times, this is just natural. It's kind of inborn self-centeredness plus laziness combined somehow or other. But we have a tendency to kind of walk into conversations assuming that the other person we're talking to knows everything we know, has our entire backstory, and all of that at their disposal every time something comes out of our mouth such that they can understand it. It's like, no, sorry. When I put it that way, obviously that's not true, but we need to do some work to kind of draw that out so we can get to a place where we understand what we're trying to say to each other. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, cool. Clarify terms, clarify analysis. Now I know what you're saying and why you think that, but I need more information. So next thing, I want you to clarify sources. Okay, I understand what you're saying. I understand why you think it, but give me the information that caused you to think this way. Like, whatever information you have floating in your head didn't just appear out of nowhere, right? It came from somewhere, so point me to it. Like, show me, what was it, a YouTube video that you watched? Was it an article that you read? Was it something from a textbook? Was it something your parents taught you? Like, where did it come from? I want to know the source of the information. Because if you tell me what the source of the information is, then I can evaluate whether that's actually a credible source, okay? Just because I have a source of information doesn't mean it's a good one, right? So let me, gosh, I didn't leave room on the board to do this, but I'll teach it to you anyway, and then I'll erase it. So when it comes to source criticism and just evaluating whether or not a source is reliable, there's something from kind of the literary sciences that's called the CRAP test. Have you guys ever heard of this before? Okay, it's not a test to see whether your source is literally crap. It's an acronym. So I'll write it here. There's 2 A's. Anyhow, so the way you want to evaluate your source is you want to look at these kind of 5 areas: the currency of the source, gosh, I should remember this at this point: relevance, authority, accuracy, and then purpose. Okay, so this is the sort of thing, like, your opponent gives you whatever their source is, say it's, I don't know, some news article or something like that, and you're looking at it and you say, okay, I've got to figure out if this source is credible. Here's 5 different tests I'm going to apply to it. Is the source current? Like, wait a second, this thing is 5 years old. Okay, is the information in it still relevant? Like, is there new data that's come to light in the last 5 years that invalidates it? There are all these questions I can ask based on the age of the information. But just because something's old doesn't mean it's garbage, okay? If the thing that you're looking at is really, really old and the source talking about it is really, really old, that could be a good thing because it's closer in history to the event that occurred, you know? So just because it's old doesn't mean it's bad, but you have to ask these questions of, does the distance in time impact whether or not the source is any good? Okay, so that's one thing. Relevance, it's a question of if the source is actually pertinent to the thing you're talking about. A lot of times people will like to just throw out, like, we're talking about some source. I don't know, give me something scientific. I need a scientific topic. Global warming. Okay, good. We're talking about global warming. And then someone will throw a source at me and it's like, this doesn't directly relate to, I mean, it's vaguely related, but I need more hard data to look at. So that's one where you can be like, hang on, if this isn't exactly relevant, then maybe we should look for better information to base our conclusions on here. Okay. Authority, this is a big one. Gosh, especially in the scientific realm, but really anywhere. There's a very strong tendency, like, if you ask someone for a source and they actually give you one, a lot of times they may just not have one, but if they give you one, they will wind up appealing to some authority figure. Well, so-and-so who's, the genius in this area said, fill in the blank. And it's the sort of thing where it may be the case that they are actually completely qualified to speak about the subject that you're talking about. We're going to stick with global warming because that one sounds good. Let me give you an example. A scientist said that, insert, whatever the opinion is here. It's like, oh, a scientist, we're talking about global warming, so clearly that's relevant. It's like, well, wait, what kind of scientist are they? Okay, they're an endocrinologist. Okay, I'm glad they're a scientist, but do they really have all the information necessary to speak about global warming? It may be a faulty appeal to authority. Okay? So that's one where you really want to dig in and assess, is this a good source of authority, or is there something lacking here? And just because the title is off doesn't necessarily mean they're bad at something. Like, they may do something professionally for a living, but they actually do have a lot of experience in this area. So you have to go past face value. Does that kind of make sense? All right. Accuracy. This isn't one where you can just ask, like, how accurate is the information? Really, you have to look at kind of where things are coming from. Like, is this journal, for instance, if I'm looking at an article, is this journal one that has a really solid reputation? Or is it kind of sketchy and on the fringes? Is there a situation where maybe there have been like retractions printed after the initial publication, and that kind of makes the rest of it suspect? So questions along those lines. And then the last thing in assessing credibility of the source is purpose. If the source is there, and you can tell just based on reading it that it's an unbiased presentation of the facts, and then followed with some subject matter interpretation, but the purpose is to inform, right? Here's all the information, this is what we think about it, draw your own conclusions. That's great. On the other hand, if you can tell the purpose is to persuade or to strongly influence in one direction or another, or things like that, that's where you're like, wait a second, I don't know if this is a good source for us to be really basing our opinions on, because it seems really heavily slanted in one direction. Does that kind of make sense? All right. I spent maybe a little too much time on that, but I think it's important. The CRAP test, remember the acronym. It's okay. On the resources page, we've got links to all this stuff, so you can look it up later. You don't have to memorize everything. But when you're clarifying sources, you want to figure out, first of all, can you give me the source? A lot of times people can't. And then when you do get the source, is it a good one? So I should have written a question down here. Where'd you get your information? Okay, so 3 things to clarify. First, clarify terminology. We got to understand what the words mean. Then clarify analysis. We got to understand the thought process. Then clarify sources. We got to figure out where the information actually came from and whether it's good. Okay, the last thing in gathering information here is it's still going to be clarified, but I'm not going to label it number 4 because it doesn't necessarily follow forth. Oh dear. Destroy the microphone here. We still good on sound? Okay, cool. All right, so the first 3 you kind of need to do in order. Okay, you need to understand the words before you understand the thinking, before you understand where all the information came from. The last bit of clarification, you can kind of insert anywhere. You want to clarify motives. And that's any time in the midst of the conversation you get the feeling like, wait a second, I don't know that this person is really intending to pursue truth here. Like, I don't know that they want a meeting of the minds. There's something else going on. I'm not sure what their other motives might be, but I sense something is off. In which case, you can go ahead and start asking things like, what are you getting at? Okay, what are you getting at? Is there a certain answer you're looking for from me? Or is there a certain purpose that you're trying to achieve here? Like, I thought we were trying to figure out, how to understand this issue, but it feels like something else is going on here. So what's going on? Okay, and that doesn't need to sound accusatory. It's just like, hey, I feel like something's off in this conversation. I just want to clear the air. Like, what's going on here? Is there something you're shooting for? Because if there is, then that's something for you guys to work through. Either we work through it and we figure out, oh, okay, yeah, sorry, I was really biased coming in here, but you're right, we really should dig into the data and figure out what's going on. Great. Chances of that happening are kind of slim to nil, but great. Okay? But if you wind up asking those sorts of questions and find out this person's really not we're not engaged in a good faith argument here, at that point, feel free to just head out. Like, yeah, we've enjoyed our time together. We understand we disagree. It doesn't seem like we're going anywhere here, so we'll hit the road. Does that kind of make sense? All right, cool. So gathering information, clarification, all of that jazz. That's kind of the primary way you'll wind up using questions in conversation. And especially like when it comes to, writing and public speaking and stuff like that, these top 3 are really big ones. Shoot, I should have thought of this earlier and brought a book with me. It's called Expository Apologetics by Vodi Bakum. Does anyone know that book? Okay, homework assignment, go get Expository Apologetics by Vodi Bakum. I think it's like 2015 or something like that. But the gist of the book is he's a pastor, right? The author is. And at some point, someone in his church came to him and said, like, how do you do what you do, on a Sunday? And he's like, what are you talking about? Like expositing scripture, like we do the exegesis? And no, that you have something special about how you do your sermon preparation and your delivery. And what he eventually got to is, I do this internally, like in an internal monologue. I put myself in my audience's shoes. I ask those questions ahead of time, and then I answer them before anyone has the chance to ask me, basically. So it's a great book, highly recommend it. It really informs a lot of what we do in our little speech and debate club. But it's a great example of using this kind of clarification ahead of time before your audience has a chance to start getting mad at you because you've confused things, that sort of thing. So, okay, gather information. We're done with that one. Next up, making a point. Okay? Why would you use a question to make a point instead of just making the point? That seems kind of, I don't know, like the long way around. Why would you do that? Go for it.
Whoever you're talking to is try and see your view.
Okay, to get the other person to try to see your viewpoint? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, go for it.
To take them through the same process that you came through to get that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Use questions just kind of one at a time, lead them through the process that you went through so they understand your journey. That sounds great. So check it out. If this is just kind of the way humans work. If I make a statement that you disagree with, we're going to stick with your global warming theme because it's fun. Okay. Let's see. Say you're on the side of the Earth, the temperature is warming, it's man-made, there's doomsday right around the corner unless you destroy your vehicles and don't eat anything other than grass or whatever. That's your side of the argument. If I just come right out and say, actually the atmosphere is saturated with carbon dioxide and a change to this degree or that degree isn't going to affect the temperature whatsoever, your gut response is going to be what? Nuh-uh. Right? Okay, you've got your viewpoint, you're set in your ways, and all I've done is I've said, you're wrong. Okay, it doesn't matter how flowery I try to put that. The way it comes across is, you're wrong. Okay, and that triggers this kind of fight or flight response. Like, no, I'm right, I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy. I'm digging in my heels here, for crying out loud. Okay? So that's maybe a little exaggerated example, but that is generally what happens when we're in argument and we say something directly. Okay? But the alternative way to do things, instead of saying something directly, I'm going to ask questions to walk you to that conclusion. I'm never going to say the conclusion, I'm just going to use questions to lead you to the conclusion, because here's what happens. If you make the conclusion in your head with your own logical thought processes and you're the good guy, oh shoot, that's probably right. Right? If I tell you the conclusion and I'm the bad guy, then no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. But you've gone through the effort of doing all the thinking and doing all the reasoning, and you're the one who decided the conclusion, it's much harder to disagree with that. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so that's why we're going to use questions to make a point instead. So you can make all sorts of different points using questions. There are a couple kind of general ones that I want to focus on because they come up more often than not. So let me give you some examples. Have you guys studied logical fallacies at all? Yeah? Okay, what can you tell me about logical fallacies? Fun stuff? Yeah.
Like red herrings.
Red herrings, yeah, that's definitely one of them. Fallacy of distraction. Okay, so logical fallacies, there's a whole lot you can study there. I'm glad to hear some of y'all have done that. If you check out the resources page on our website, we've got, I don't know, half a dozen books that we recommend in the logic and reason arena. Logical fallacies are particularly fun to study because then once you know what they are, you realize they're everywhere. And especially if you're studying them with friends and family and stuff, then you all just have fun going, fallacy, whenever they pop up. And it's a fun little game and really annoying, so don't overdo it. So logical fallacies, take some examples here. You mentioned red herrings. So that's a fallacy of distraction where someone throws out something that sounds vaguely related, but really the conversation just took a left turn. So how could I use a question to deal with that? What do you think? Yeah, go for it.
Ask a direct question about their, like, what they're explaining in order to get them to explain one direct thing.
Yeah.
To kind of like keep them from jumping it up and distraction.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So ask a question to get them to explain one direct thing instead of getting distracted. So, wait a second, I thought we were talking about climate change here. How on earth did we get to, like, orphan children in the third world? Okay, it's an honest question. Like, we took a left turn somewhere and I don't know what happened. Please explain. Okay? And in situations like that, there's kind of two ways things go. Either the other person didn't realize what they did, and they're like, "What? I don't know. How did we wind up there?" And then you can follow that up with, can we finish the conversation about global warming? Yeah, sure, let's do that. Or you may be in a situation where someone's intentionally using logical fallacies to distract, right? I realize that my viewpoint is weak and I don't have the argumentation skills I should probably have, so instead of trying to win the debate, I'm going to try to distract you and distract everyone else such that everyone walks away going, what just happened? Okay, in that case, you use questions to point that out. Like, are you actually interested in having this debate, or are you just trying to throw stuff at the wall? Okay, so it's up to you to really kind of gauge the room, gauge the other person that you're having the conversation with. Like, are they engaged with you in good faith or not? Okay, if in good faith, then keep everything gentle, polite, that sort of thing. If they're not, don't be a jerk, but be more pointed in your questioning, so especially the rest of the audience realizes, wait a second, something's fishy here. You know, I trust this guy, I don't trust that guy. Does that make sense? Okay, so red herrings, that's a great example. How about mutually exclusive views? That's one that comes up a lot. I believe two things at the same time, but they can't both be true at the same time. Like, they don't work. They're contradictory. Do you guys run into that one ever? Surely. Yeah, so this one I see a lot when it comes to counterfeit worldviews. Worldview analysis, that's a whole other workshop. We could talk for hours on it. But the gist of it is there's the biblical worldview, and then there's various perversions of that. Okay? One of the things that frustrates me to no end is it's remarkably common. It makes sense, right? Sinful human nature, I get it. But it's remarkably common to run into people in the church who will say they hold to a biblical worldview, particularly if you ask them like Sunday school type questions. Like, is Jesus the way to salvation? Yes, obviously Jesus. Okay, yeah, I can pass that test. But when it comes to how I live my life and how I think, particularly outside the confines of church, I'm actually operating by a different worldview. And it's one that cannot be true at the same time as the other one. Okay? So in those situations, it's the same sort of thing. Don't be a jerk, but just ask, gentle, polite questions like, hang on a second, you're saying this one thing, but you're also saying this thing. How do those two go together? Yeah.
This is a perfect example. I have these twin friends I grew up with my whole life, so I feel very comfortable with them. One
Okay.
converted to Islam, and the other one is a Christian.
Okay.
And their dad passed away, and I thought it was a great opportunity. Not at that time, but he passed away a few years ago.
Okay.
But we were having a conversation, and I thought it was a great time to bring up, what do you really believe? And I said, one of you must believe your dad did not make heaven or paradise, right?
Right.
But I could not get them to, right, the one that was with Islam said, well, who's been telling us all this time, I prayed for you that you would convert to Islam so that you would go to paradise.
Right.
This time said, well, surely we all belong to God. That was her answer. And I'm like,
Oh, interesting.
great, we can't believe
I'm not actually Muslim, I'm Unitarian now.
This was interesting. It's exactly what you say. They usually excuses. It was a perfect, I thought,
Right.
opportunity to, make
Right.
them think, what do you believe?
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, situations like that, well, I'll tell you this. A lot of times, it's hard in the moment to realize that you're wrong. Okay? That's a hard thing to do, period, right? Of course I'm right. Actually, little side note, I often get in trouble. Like, people will say, like, what the heck is wrong with Jason? He always thinks he's right. It's like, yes, everyone does. Everyone always thinks they're right. The question is, how quickly can you figure out you're wrong and change your opinion, right? Okay, so it's hard for people to realize they're wrong in the midst of conversation, okay? Even if they do realize they're wrong, it's even harder for them to admit it in the midst of conversation. So your job in all of this is to ask the right questions. Don't expect that your desired outcome is going to happen right then and there, okay? People will need time to process. More specifically, the Holy Spirit needs time to work, okay? You're not in control of the timeline here. And it's the sort of thing where the question you ask contributes to the question that you ask 3 years later, contributes to, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully, eventually, there's reconciliation and redemption at some point in that timeline. But I guess the thing I'm trying to say to you is don't walk into a conversation thinking I've got to seal the deal today, otherwise the end of the world. That puts too much stress and pressure on you, and it's probably not going to happen anyway. Okay, so you're responsible for asking the right questions, and then leave the rest of it up to God. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. We could talk about more logical fallacies. It'd be fun, but instead, let's talk about poor sources. Okay, we're not going to go into too much depth here because we already did, the crap test and all of that stuff. But when you run into a bad source, gently use questions to help the other person realize that it's a bad source. Okay? Like, wait a second, this piece of information you have is a couple years old now, and this is a rapidly evolving situation. Can we find something more recent? If the answer is yes, then yeah, they're engaged in good faith. You're trying to pursue truth together. If the answer is, it's like, okay, well, they weren't actually interested in truth. They just wanted to throw something at me. So, yeah, just think of all the stuff that we looked at with the crap test earlier. The next thing, you're going to run into this a lot. Fact versus opinion. You especially see this when you're dealing with that source criticism and people say, well, I have an expert who says, right? It's the tyranny of the experts. Or it's someone trying to pose as the science, trying to convince you that is the final rule on things. Good questions to ask when you're in this arena is like, okay, I understand that you have a source. I understand they're a subject matter expert. But can you show me the data? Like, please? It's one thing for someone to be a subject matter expert and to think something, but those opinions could be influenced by who knows what, right? It could be influenced by the data. I sure hope it was. It could be influenced by whatever else is going on in their community. It could be influenced by their worldview. It's absolutely influenced by that. By any kind of philosophical presuppositions they might have. Opinions are an amalgamation of all sorts of information. But can you show me the data? Okay, if you can, that's a really good sign. Like if you run into sources that are very transparent about all of the information, like here's all the data, here's how it was collected, here's how all the analysis was done, this is what we think about it, we invite you to draw your own conclusions, that's great. That's how science is supposed to work. Not how it always works. However, if you run into sources where you don't get that, you don't actually get the facts, you just get, okay, it is a fact that this expert thinks this thing, that's an opinion. Okay, that's not actually the facts you're looking for. Okay, so just be polite about it. Can you show me the data? If you can't, why not? Or if your source doesn't show you the data, then, should we really trust that source? Like, why is it that we have to take their opinion on faith as opposed to being able to actually think through it themselves? Like, are we not smart enough to think? Like, these are the kind of questions you can throw out there and help the other person realize that, wait a second, we've got some work to do if we really want to get down to the root of this issue. And then the last thing I'm going to throw up here is hypocrisy. Why would I use questions to point out hypocrisy? What do you think? Yeah, go for it. Yeah, there's some disconnect between what you're saying and the way you live. That's weird, right? Because if you really believed what you believe, then surely that would play itself out in the way you live, right? Okay? So gently ask questions about it. Like, wait a second, I understand what you're saying. We've gone through all this other work, right? We understand each other. But what I don't understand is why you're not living that out, right? I saw an interesting example of this not too long ago. I forget where it was from, but it was someone was arguing that in order to save the planet, we needed to get rid of all plastics, right? Plastics, destroying the ocean and the environment and this, that, and the other thing. We need to, ban plastics completely. It's like, okay, let's gently ask questions to see if we can help them understand any hypocrisy that might be built in there. So the line of questioning was something like, okay, so I need to get rid of all my plastics, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, but have you gotten rid of all your plastics? Oh, yeah. I use, I do reusable bags at the grocery store, so I'm not using those plastic bags. I try to buy all my food in bulk so I don't have to deal with all the packaging and stuff like that. It's like, okay, yeah, I see that you're wearing glasses. Do you want to get rid of those plastics? What? Oh, wait, but I need those to see. That's not fair. Okay, leave the glasses. You need to see. What about that shirt of yours? That has polyester in it. That's a plastic. You ready to get rid of your clothing? Wait a second. Hang on, do you have your cell phone on you? Well, sure, I have my cell phone. You ready to get rid of those plastics? What about a laptop at home? What about a TV? What about? And then you realize, wait a second, I can't possibly get rid of all my plastics. My life is full of plastic. But the person who was arguing for it didn't realize it until the other one had gently gone through this line of questioning to help them realize, like, wait a second, what you're arguing for is not in conformity with your life. Okay? So, again, don't be a jerk. Like, the other way you could have gone about that is like, you nincompoop, start throwing names at them. You wear glasses, your clothing has plastic in it, you've got a cell phone in your pocket, you've got all sorts of, you have a coffee maker at home, you're not going to give up your coffee maker. Like, you could go at it really poorly, or you could go at it really gently and help them to understand, wait a second, there is a disconnect. Okay? And then don't expect any miraculous change right then and there. Expect them to go away and think about it some more. Okay? So, ways of making a point. Real quick, word of caution. With all this in mind, I don't want you to walk into a conversation and after all sorts of questioning, wind up making some sort of comment that says, well, look, Your Honor, my opponent is clearly an illogical hypocrite who has a bunch of opinions that he can't substantiate with sources. Like, no, don't do that. You may have that information kind of filed away in your head, but don't use this as a weapon to bludgeon your other person with. Your goal in all of this is to find truth for yourself and to help them find it. Okay, if you start beating the snot out of them, that doesn't work. All right, last thing, redirecting the conversation. All right, we'll go a little quickly through this one. Another 4 things to look at here. This is where things have started to go bad and you need to push things in a different direction or just get out of Dodge. Okay, so the first scenario, you guys know some Latin? What's ad hominem? Surely, we're homeschoolers, we must know some Latin. Ad hominem, against the against the person. Okay? Ad hominem, against the person. This is when someone starts attacking you instead of attacking your argument. Okay? We're in the midst of our global warming head to head, and you're like, well, you look silly in that hat, sir. Whatever. You start attacking the person instead of the argument. Okay? When that comes up, you realize that the conversation has just taken a nosedive. We're not talking the issue anymore. We're going to start hurling insults back and forth. No good. So, 2 possibilities. You wind up asking, assume in all instances that there's no ill intent until you really have a good feeling that there is ill intent. Does that make sense? So walk into it assuming they probably didn't realize what they just did. Ask a polite question. Hang on a second. We were debating global warming. Why is it that you're attacking me personally now? If everything is on the up and up, hopefully they respond with, what? No, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I did that. I'm so sorry. And then you get back to talking global warming. Okay? But if things aren't on the up and up, things just continue to nosedive further. And you make it readily apparent, especially to the wider audience, that this person isn't intending to actually have a meeting of the minds here. They just want to win at all costs. You guys watched any of the presidential debates? Great examples. Oh yeah, well your daughter uses Twitter, and anyhow, all sorts of nonsense. Yeah, as a debate coach, I really despise the presidential debates. They're just awful. So anyhow, that's one of them there. Another situation. Anytime your opponent winds up resorting to rudeness, okay? So, again, assume the best, right? This may be the case that mom and dad never taught them how to be polite, right? They never learned any social graces. So you may have a situation where they're just trying to walk all over you. Like they're a fast talker. All they do is keep talking. They don't give you any time to get a word in edgewise. It's just talk. It's like, whoa there, buddy. Okay. Assume the best. Say, hang on a second. Do you mind if I interject something here? Okay. If they don't mind, then great. You can kind of tone things back a bit such that you can actually have some back and forth instead of one person just rambling on. But if they don't allow you that courtesy, then it's like, okay, let's make this apparent to the rest of the audience. So wait, am I not allowed to say anything? Right? Do you not actually care what I think? Like, just make it blatant. Clearly this person doesn't have any interest in engaging with me. I want to make sure the rest of y'all realize that before we walk away here. So that's how to deal with rudeness. Let me think of some other examples. You may have a situation like if anyone starts to get really angry, like they get really worked up because they're really passionate about their topic, whatever it is, that may just be they're getting really excited, or it may be that they have a tendency to try to get their way via anger. So it's up to you to be discerning and figure out, like, wait a second, what's the situation here? Can we take a step back and tone things down a bit? That's a simple question to ask. Or, wait, are you expecting to scare me into submission? That's more for the rest of the audience to realize that, wait a second, this person's kind of underhanded in their dealings. So anytime you run into any kind of rudeness, like, start with the gentle ones, assume the best, and then once you realize that we're not dealing with the best, then just make it readily apparent to everyone else that, you know, this conversation's done. Okay? All right. Another one, which is really useful, is to narrate the debate. Whoops. Again, I'm not good at writing today. You guys ever notice that you're completely fine doing something until you're on camera? That's how writing is. Anyhow, narrate the debate. What this one is, you know, we talked earlier about the red herring. You know, we took a turn off into left field. Sometimes it's not that abrupt. Sometimes the conversation just kind of gradually wanders, and you realize at some point, wait a second, we're not talking about what we started at. In that case, you know, it's probably not any ill intent on the other part, hopefully, but it can be useful to say, hang on, can we take a step back? Because, you see, we started talking about this one thing over here, and then we found ourselves talking about this thing, and then we moved on to this other thing, and now we're way over here, and that has nothing to do with what we started about. Like, can we pause a moment? Like, all of these are good things to look into, but can we tackle one of them first before we move on? And if the answer is yes, great. Yeah, you pick one of them to focus on, you actually dive into that conversation. But again, the goal in all of this is you want the conversation to be productive, right? If we keep getting distracted every, say, 10, 20 minutes or so and switching gears to a new topic, we're not really being that productive, okay? So that can be helpful. Actually, something that's good with this, does narrate have 2 R's? My goodness.
It's actually a word with 1 R too.
Oh my goodness, that's okay, we're having fun. Something else that may be useful in the midst of this is if you have some scrap paper on hand, actually like draw a little map. Like draw a little map, like here's the little circuitous route that we've taken, and feel free to point out, like, you know, when we were on this point, these were our points of contention, and here's where we agreed, and here's where we disagreed. When you actually map it out like that, or even if you just, you know, go about list making, that's helpful because then both of you can see it on the page and be like, okay, yeah, these are all the things we've talked about. Here's where we disagree, here's where we need to focus. Whereas if we never write anything down, it's too easy to be forgetful. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Last thing here, redirecting a conversation. I need more time. Okay? You can use this at any point, and this isn't necessarily used when things have really taken a turn for the worse. It's just, you know, assuming the conversation has gone well, you've walked into the conversation with a certain set of information. The other person walked in with a different set of information. Hopefully you've shared that information well together, which means that you have more data now than you did when you started. And you may reach a point where, like, okay, I need to just think about this some more, right? So that's okay. Ask for time to process. Like, can we table this for now? And I need to go, you know, do some more research, do some more thinking. Can we pick this up, say, next Wednesday at, are you free at 3 o'clock? Really important to actually set a time for picking the conversation back up, because it's way too easy to forget about it. If you really want to get to the bottom of things, set a time, set a place, make sure that it actually happens. But if everyone's well-intentioned, that should be an easy request, right? Like, I want to keep digging into this. I want to keep digging into this with you. Can we carry it on later? Yeah, sure, absolutely. But sometimes you're in a situation where things have taken a turn for the worse. The other guy is like, what, you don't have an answer right now? Where's your source? And they're demanding something immediately, like, I need an answer now, otherwise you lose. It's like, okay, sorry. If you're not going to give me time to get the information that you want me to provide for you, then it's apparent to all of us that you don't actually care. You care about making me look bad, I got it. Yeah, I'm okay with looking bad. Yay, you won, I'll leave now. Whoop-de-doo. But you want to make it clear to the audience that this person is not actually engaged in finding truth here. They're smearing me at this point. They're saying, what, clearly you don't carry around all your information at all times and you can't give it to me at the drop of a hat? I mean, that's ridiculous. I guess theoretically someone could have an eidetic memory and have everything memorized at all times. But no, not in reality. So, all right, that's why we use questions. 3 main purposes: gathering information, making a point, redirecting a conversation. Most of the time you're doing this one here, particularly these 3. Clarifying terms, analysis, and then source information. So then the question is, as we wrap things up here, what do you do with all this information? So I have some kind of take-home walking points for you. For you guys that are here, the recommendation would be, go ahead and study this some more and figure out how to use it regularly. I was talking to some folks before we started here. There's a book recommendation I have for you. It's called Tactics by Greg Koukl. I forget when this came out initially, but when I read it, I thought, oh, this is great. Someone's finally taken all the stuff that I know how to do and put it into a book. That's awesome. Koukl specifically, though, he approaches this from the perspective of, it's all the same information, just a different presentation of it. And he specifically looks at it from the perspective of, this is how you share and defend your Christian faith. Okay? It's actually more general than that. I don't know if you didn't realize it or whatever. That everything I've taught you today is how to convince someone you're right. If you're on the side of truth, then great, that's awesome. But these tactics could all still be used by people on the side of lies. Okay? So Greg Koukl goes about it from the perspective of, I assume you're a Christian, you have truth on your side, here's how you go about sharing that truth with others. It's a really great resource. Another resource I'll point out to you, How to Speak, How to Listen by Mortimer Adler. He's great. He's got lots of good stuff. But this is, I was telling someone earlier, it's kind of like a more approachable modern take on like Aristotle's rhetoric or something like that. It's just generally, if you're speaking, if you're engaged in conversation, these are ways to go about it that are productive. So 2 recommendations there. You've got the resource pages on the tables there. There's more information on our website. So those are recommendations for you. For parents specifically, it's figure out how to incorporate this stuff into just kind of your weekly rhythm. I know the way it's worked with our family, my kids are 9 and younger, so they're actually pretty young for doing this sort of stuff. But they can memorize, what do you mean by that? And they can ask it all the time, so it's just fun. It's a game, right? We have, in the midst of conversation, even the younger ones, like as young as 5, have been trained to ask questions like, what do you mean by that? What are you talking about? Why do you think that? Stuff like that. So you have fun with it. I mean, if you want, you can even, come up with some sort of reward strategy. Like anytime someone legitimately asks it, you throw a Skittle at them or something. I don't know. And then other thoughts here, like as you're going about your writing, your public speaking, anything like that, or if you know people who do that more professionally, like pastors, various church leaders, that sort of thing, let them know about this skill set, because I mean, you wind up being more persuasive, you wind up having better success in your engagement with others if you're using this skill set rather than just trying to butt heads by throwing information back and forth. So those are some little takeaway recommendations. Yeah, we're going to stop the recording now. We'll pause, let everyone stand up, mill about, go get snacks, and then in, say, 7 minutes, we will start practicing all of this with an extemporaneous debate topic.